united to him. Do you see how wonderful this reading is? How rich it is? How we understand that we have a Savior who is the eternal God, took on human flesh, and is now seated at the right hand of God in his body, and we are united to him as if we are seated there too. And to the extent that we are in Christ, we are. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, let us unite ourselves to Christ, unite ourselves to God, be one with him, receive the grace that is from him so that we can be the people that God wants us to be, has created us to be, united himself to us so that we can unite ourselves to him. To him is our life with the Father and the Spirit, be glory, honor, and majesty, always, now, and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Glory to Jesus Christ.
That was Father Tom Soroka with Sermons at St. Nicholas. This is a weekly presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
The ancient faith for the modern world. This is Ancient Faith Radio.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us on this August 9th evening. My name is Father Nicholas Louh, and I'm the parish priest at St. John the Divine right here in the city of Jacksonville, Florida. In fact, this is a ministry of our church. And tonight I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Louh, who's a clinical psychologist. And we're just so blessed and excited that you're taking the time this evening to be with us. Live with the Louhs is a show that marries both faith and psychology together with the hope and prayer that we kind of give you some practical tools to live by in your walk of faith every single week. In fact, our show broadcasts live every week on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Ancient Faith Radio. And tonight, before we jump into our topic, we do want to encourage you to stay connected to us by joining our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Facebook and we're on Twitter and Instagram and on YouTube. In fact, all of our sermons are all on YouTube. And we made it so easy for you to join these different platforms. They're all under the headings of The Louhs. And our last name is kind of spelled quite uniquely. It's spelled Louhs. That's Louhs. And so definitely, if you're on social media, definitely take advantage of that. Or if you're looking for some sermons that just to kind of lift you up throughout the week, definitely check us out on YouTube. And if you're listening to our show tonight and are interested in receiving our daily inspirational messages, every morning at 7 a.m., we send out hundreds and hundreds of daily messages just to people that are looking for some hope, some encouragement, just some practicality in their walk of faith. And so we do this. And if you're interested, there's no strings attached. All you have to do is go to our website at thelouhs.com, click on that subscribe button, simply put your email address in there. And tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you'll receive a daily word of encouragement. And if you're already receiving those messages and you find them beneficial, do us a favor. Help us to share this light, this ministry, by sharing them with your friends and your family. As always, we'd love to have you join our show through calling in or through email. So you can call in tonight at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. We actually already received a question just a few moments ago, right before we went on the air of the show. So please, if you have a question, you could totally be anonymous about it. Or if you want to call in and be anonymous, we totally will understand and respect that. So please take advantage of that. And also, we are broadcasting our show live tonight on our Facebook platform, as well as Ancient Faith's Facebook platform. So just so you all know. Last week, we had a very powerful show. We talked about suicide, and we shared with all of you that how every 11 minutes, someone in our country commits suicide. To be more specific, we spoke about how in the span of last week's show, 5 people would take their lives. There's also another major epidemic that's facing so many people. It's an epidemic that's so great that I believe that it's the number one health problem that we're facing in this world. So many people are struggling with it, sadly, in secrecy because of shame or just the feeling that they're not faithful enough. People may not even be aware that they're even struggling with it. It impacts not only the person who's dealing with it, but also impacts all the people that are around them. It's impacting our ability to even fulfill what God's purpose is in our life. So what is this epidemic? It's depression, friends. Listen to one of the definitions that we read about right before the show. Listen to what it says. It says, depression is defined as a mood disorder that is characterized by chronic and persistent sadness and a lack of interest. Roxanne, I know we were talking about this earlier. Maybe just share some studies with our listeners just about how many people are really impacted by depression.
Well, it's interesting, as I look out into the world today, and I really embrace what's come with this pandemic. And some of these numbers, surprise me because I actually think it could be higher than what's reported. And
Right.
that's often the case with, mental health. Not everything's reported, but studies are showing roughly right now, U.S. adults, 23.2% of U.S. adults are endorsing symptoms of a depressive disorder. Keep in mind, this is just people who qualify for a clinical diagnosis of depression. This is not just people who are struggling with adjustment-related conditions and
Right.
sadness and the stress of the pandemic. And in the first year of the pandemic, actually global prevalence increased for depression and anxiety of over 25% higher than our typical rate. So you can imagine that during this time, 50% of Americans were struggling with either anxiety or depression, during that time of that first year of COVID. Young people and women are affected the most and have been hit the most since the pandemic. And unfortunately, this has sort of coincided with this severe disruption to access to care. So mental health services, there's been really a huge gap for people trying to receive and look for services. It is the leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 15 and 24. And every 11 minutes, we shared this last week, every 11 minutes, someone in this country takes their own lives through suicide.
Right. And I was reading too, Roxanne, that according to the CDC, during COVID, just phone calls to the mental health hotline, which I'm happy to say that people were actually calling, but went up 900% in 2020 alone.
That's right.
And the CDC says that 1 out of every 4 young people under the age of 30 has considered suicide in 2020 due to, in large part, by depression. And, all of us at some point will go through a season in our life. And maybe as you're listening to our show tonight, maybe you're going through a season of depression, maybe a season of just struggle. And what I want all of us to kind of know is first is that we're not alone. We know that people that are on television, people that are celebrities, come out and share that they struggle with depression. We've heard recently about people like Lady Gaga, a celebrity, and people like very famous celebrities like The Rock. And we hear sadly about Robin Williams.
Right, exactly. I mean, that was a real surprise. God bless you. A real surprise. But, that's just a reminder that so many people who are smiling are suffering beneath that smile.
Right. And looking through American history, many of you may not be aware, but Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, said this one time. He struggled with depression and chronicles it quite regularly. He said, if people knew what I was going through, there wouldn't be one cheerful person on this earth. It's just amazing that someone that was so famed as Abraham Lincoln struggles with this. And so one of the things I just really want to kind of lay the framework and the groundwork for all of us to remember is that there's 2 observations that are worth sharing on the front end of our show tonight. And that is that one is that there are biological reasons for depression. So I think sometimes we think that we can just kind of motivate them and that they can just kind of bounce back, or we can just kind of, just shape up and, think positive. But there are physiological and biological reasons for why some people struggle with depression.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. We actually had an email question come in,
Hmm.
or actually, I believe it was a Facebook. Someone who reached out via Facebook,
Hmm.
and they were sort of saying, it would be great if you could address how sometimes, people within church settings call depression and mental illness a spiritual failing.
Hmm.
And the writer says this, in my opinion, can be so harmful for someone who is truly struggling, and it could have the potential for pushing someone, the suffering person, away from the church rather than toward the church. And I think that this is often depression is a very loosely used terms, and
Hmm.
somewhat poorly defined, kind of nebulous, almost can be like a nebulous diagnostic category, right? There's such a wide ranging group of symptoms. Sometimes the term gets thrown around quite loosely. People can say, I'm just depressed.
Hmm.
But where there is clinical depression, I think it's important to remember there is, no single known cause of depression. It's a combination of genetic, biochemical, environmental, and psychological factors,
Hmm.
right? So, even the trauma, the loss of a loved one, believe it or not, a difficult relationship that kind of creates a chronic stress in our life,
Hmm.
any situation that really overwhelms our ability to cope in a chronic sense, pushes us kind of beyond our capacity to cope and respond over a chronic period of time, can create a depressive episode, even someone who wasn't otherwise prone to developing clinical depression.
Hmm.
Um, and so, in brain imaging has shown us, the brains of people who have depression, who have clinical depression, they do look different from people without depression. And so it's important to note that the parts of the brain that are responsible for regulating mood, thinking, sleep, appetite, and behaviors really are functioning abnormally in people who are struggling with clinical levels of depression. And we also know, and this is common knowledge, that the chemicals that the brain uses to communicate, those we know are also affected in people with depression. So, again, we don't know whether the changes seen in the brain are causing the depression or they are the effect of the depression. What we do know is it is a complex set of variables, and it is not a spiritual failing.
Hmm. And I think just to build on that, the other observation, in addition to the known fact that there are biological reasons for when some are struggling with depression, is number two, is I would say that there's, sadly, what perpetuates this is that there's such a stigma, a negative stigma around the topic of depression. And we highlighted this a little bit earlier in today's show, but also in last week's show when we just really focused a great deal on suicide. But so often, we can get this idea that people are not praying enough. They're not strong in their faith, and as a result, they're having depression. And please don't misunderstand us. Obviously, there is power in prayer, and there is power in being connected to Christ, and being led by a spiritual father in a church setting and receiving of the holy sacraments. We never ever want to dismiss any of that. But I think what happens is that there's just a natural human stigma that we have towards people that that tend to struggle with depression. And I just think about this. One of the things that I'm supposed to be wearing glasses. I don't read that well, things that are close to me. So, I have to wear glasses, and unfortunately, I probably don't wear them as often as I should, but nevertheless, I'm supposed to be wearing them. But, the one thing is that I would tell you is that, basically, there's basically a part of my body that's not operating, an organ of my body, my eyes, that are not functioning at top efficiency. Well, in many ways, the mind is a part of the body too, and it can be in that same condition. And you won't think less of someone that's wearing glasses than we should think less of people that are struggling in their mind. So be very cautious to know that, whether it be you or someone else that you may know, is don't dismiss it. Just like we might wear glasses to show that maybe our eyes are not operating at total efficiency, in the same way, our minds with depression are not operating at total efficiency. And so always know, though, if you are someone that struggles with it, is always remember this: my illness doesn't need to be my identity. What I'm feeling is not who I am. It's just what I'm struggling with at that moment. Let me say that one more time. My illness doesn't need to be my identity. What I'm feeling is not who I am. It is just what I'm struggling with at the moment. So, Roxanne, I know that the first half of the show, we really wanted to kind of dedicate it to really what are the symptoms of depression. And then on the latter half of the show, maybe we'll spend some time and just kind of telling us how do we dig ourselves. The title of this show tonight is Digging Out of Depression. So we'll spend the first half just kind of talking about what are the symptoms of depression. And we encourage you, as we do every show, is call us. If you've got a question, or maybe you're struggling with a depression, or someone that you may know is depressed and you're looking for some guidance, call us right now at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And you can always email us. You can always put in the comment line on our Facebook page, The Louhs, as we're broadcasting live on the Louhs Facebook page. You can put in the comment line a question or comment, and we'll definitely get to it.
So, I mean, symptoms of depression, I mean, you can read about them online, but, what does it really look like? Oftentimes when someone's depressed, there's this sort of cognitive and almost physical lethargy, where life sort of feels tired, monotonous, and gloomy. And there's a lot of mental rumination that goes on for people who are struggling with depression, so that's kind of accompanying the gloom, and the rumination kind of matches the gloom, right? So often they're sort of living in their head more than they're living in connection to you or their outside, situation, whatever it is, whatever circumstance they're in. They may be in it physically, but emotionally and mentally, they're ruminating. So that's why they can often sort of feel alone, even when they're around lots and lots of people who love them. And unfortunately, because of that rumination and because of that neurochemistry and all those sort of physiological problems, that rumination is sort of distorted. And so there isn't really a very healthy take or perspective on life. So most of their perspectives are usually negative, hopeless, and sort of, they kind of tend to think that these feelings are stable, their relationships are sort of always going to be bad, maybe this isn't the right one for me, or my job's never going to be what it should be. There's sort of a prediction of a lot of negativity to come, as well as the negativity that they feel. And there's a lot of worthlessness and shame and guilt. And so they're really struggling with some of those more characterological, symptoms that make them feel really bad about who they are, in addition to the relationships that they may be in or their jobs. And I would say there's a lot of agitation. 50% of people who are depressed report feeling that they have a very short fuse. So they may lash out easily. And a lot of times people sort of don't know that irritation and irritability is often a presentation of someone who's really suffering of depression, and that negative outlook on life, that the downer, but she's really somebody who's struggling and maybe lost her sense of purpose and meaning in life and feels hopeless about her situation. So it can come across as somebody who tends to have a negative outlook on almost every person, every situation that they're in, or the one they're in with you. Again, another guise for depression. And it's hard to relax, when you have depression, because there's almost an agitated, restless feeling. So even sleep is not renewing. And again, they're either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. So depression, a lot of times is missed. It's not recognized. People are sort of blamed for their mood, and why can't you just sort of feel better or stop snapping at us? But it is not a passing mood. It's not eased with rest or a good snack or a break from stress. And so it really does create a lot of tendencies that I would say feed it. And Nick, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of those aspects of behaviors that we do that really feed our inclination toward depression. They're not necessarily causes, but things that really keep it maintained.
Absolutely. And I would just encourage our listeners, if you've got a pen and a piece of paper, you might want to write some of these down, just kind of see if you check any of these boxes that we're going to be sharing that are things that just kind of feed into the depression that all of us can experience in times in our lives. So number one, I would say is we are not listening to the right voices. And you've heard us on the show talk about this pretty often, but all of us are constantly communicating with ourselves. We're constantly having a conversation with ourselves. And for many of us, what we're telling ourselves is negative. We may be telling ourselves what we're not, what we will never enjoy, what we will never be able to accomplish. And we have to know that our life always follows our thoughts. That's why the church fathers speak so in detail about the power of our thinking. And we see that obviously in the scriptures themselves. I love, just to kind of give you another saint who struggled, one can argue, with a level of depression, with St. Paul. And listen to what he says. He says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8. And you can read this on your own. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8. He says this. He says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. So notice he's saying we. He's talking about what him and his team, his followers, what they were experiencing in the province of Asia. Now listen to this line. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we even despaired life itself. That's just a powerful line, that we even despaired life. So he was saying, just because you think that I've written some of the New Testament and looks like I have it all together, actually, we had some major troubles in a province in Asia that messed me up. So much so that I despaired life. Not just me, but we despaired life. There's things that you can read in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verses 17 and through 20 that speaks about, again, you hear, I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. In my wandering, the bitterness and the gall, I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Just a powerful statement that we hear of the people struggling with just a negative thoughts, negative being. I heard someone put it like this: 95% of our emotions, of what we tell ourselves, 95% of our emotions come from what we tell ourselves. So that conversation that we're having, those thoughts that we're having, are shaping how in which we feel about ourselves. It's a cascading effect, friends. Roxanne mentioned it beautifully about ruminating, and how oftentimes ruminating is basically just allowing our mind to just keep thinking and thinking and then rethinking and rethinking. And as a total point of transparency for all of you, this is something that I have to be very cautious of, because I have a tendency to sometimes just kind of ruminate on things and just think, okay, how do I need to do this or do that? And, we as a society, and especially for those of us who, tend to want to try to be goal seekers and try to achieve goals, sometimes we may not realize, but we're spending a great deal of time ruminating. So it could be positive, in which we're constantly trying to figure out and analyzing. But as Roxanne mentioned beautifully, it also, if unguarded or not protected or not watched over, if you will, can allow us to become fatigued, lethargic. It weakens us. And as we've talked about in the past, we will find ourselves more going down a road of depression when we're oftentimes extremely weak and tired emotionally and physically. So that's number one, is that we have just an unhealthy way of thinking.
And really, that this is something that both comes with depression and feeds it. So remember, most of the time our thoughts are consistent with our mood. Super important to remember this, right? That our thoughts are consistent with our mood. We can think completely different about something when we are feeling better than we did when we were upset in the moment about something else. So remember, just because you think it or just because you feel it does not mean it's true. It's just a cause for pause to sort of go in and evaluate. And if you know that you struggle with depression, or you're in sort of an episode of depression, our number one goal for you would be to not trust your thinking amidst that that space, that mental space. That is, it can become a deeply spiritual battle at that point, and we can kind of go further down into the trenches.
So a great filter that we love, and we actually mentioned this in our book, Renewing You, that was published here on Ancient Faith, a great filter is what the Bible shares in the book of Philippians chapter 4, verses 8-9. It says this: finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, and I emphasize what's right, not necessarily what we think, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things, and the God of peace will be with you. This is like a beautiful list to kind of just menu list as you're kind of going through. Is this thought that I'm thinking about, is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Think about those things. Here's number 2. I think another area, Roxanne, that feeds a great deal of depression, and I think we're seeing that so often in our social, when we look at studies and statistics on social media and its impact on us as a society, is number 2 would be comparing ourselves to others. Another area that when we're watching, someone else's highlight reel of where they went on vacation or how great their kids are or how great their life is, and we end up comparing ourselves. And this is just one, obviously, venue through social media, but just in general, our ability to compare perpetuates this idea that we're lacking, that we kind of perpetuates this depression that some of us can feel, that that we're just not where we need to be, that someone else is better, and we can kind of think negative about who we are and who we're called to be.
And remember that worthlessness that is such a symptom of depression, that's going to feed those comparison models, because there is not that really feeling of value. When we're struggling in depression, we forget that our purpose remains, whether in darkness or in light. And we forget sometimes that, our feelings of worth can sometimes match our mood, right? And that can be fleeting and changing. So again, sort of guarding ourselves with self-awareness, that what I may be feeling about my worth, and comparing myself to someone else may be more a symptom of where I've been struggling, and what I might be valuing or hoping for in my life rather than where I'm losing. We're not good enough.
President Theodore Roosevelt said this: comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. It's when we allow ourselves to compare. Listen to what the book of Galatians, St. Paul says this in the book of Galatians, chapter 6, verses 4-5. I love this verse. It says, each one of you should test their own actions. Then they can take pride, we would say a holy pride, in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. In other words, we are all going to be standing before God, and that some of us are running a race, sometimes that we're running a race that God never intended us to run. We're living out some sort of a story or wanting to have someone else's life that God never intended us to live. So be very careful about that. Make sure that we recognize that one of the ways that we feed our depression is comparing ourselves with others. Here's number 3. Number 3 is not living a life in balance. We talk about depression, we talk about this as a chemical imbalance. But I would like to argue with you that I think there is one of the leading causes of depression is not necessarily a chemical imbalance, but a life imbalance. We're living in a world, as you all know, where it's more work, more money, the more that we have, the better off we're going to feel. It's more about the more. And I think that so often what we're struggling with is just the inability to kind of just slow down, just to be able to slow down for ourselves and for the people that are with us.
And I think that stillness, the importance of stillness, helps us sort of recognize what our capacity is and whether we're living within it. So often the more is better, better is best philosophy and the comparisons that you were just talking about sometimes cause us to try to live beyond what we are capable of doing. And just because it can fit into our day, or because it fit into someone else's day, doesn't mean it should fit into ours. Really, if we look at Jesus's life, there was a level of simplicity by which he lived his life. There was a lot of stillness seeking. There was solitude, and I think in some ways we have to really let go of what doesn't have to get done, and really try to prioritize what we're putting on our throne in our life, because I think many of us are living in a state of being overwhelmed, which can affect our brain chemistry, which can then affect, and welcome in a depressive episode that really shouldn't have been there had we sort of respected that capacity. But again, without stillness, without tuning into our bodies and our minds, I don't know that we even recognize when we are doing that, when we have overscheduled ourselves. And that isn't always easy. That requires a lot of saying no and really discerning our priorities and our values.
Yeah, I heard someone put it this way, that not everything that is doable is sustainable.
That's a great way to
Not
put it.
everything that is doable is sustainable. So for a lot of us, we've created a space that we can't continue, and it's starting to catch up with us. I love in the book of Ecclesiastes, it says this. And again, we're just trying to give you some very practical things for you, just to kind of help you if you happen to be dealing with depression, if you're struggling with that right now, or you know someone that may be, just giving you some just points of what are the reasons what are that cause us, that feed into our depression. But listen to what the book of Ecclesiastes says. Chapter 4, verses 6, it says, better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil, and we're chasing after the wind.
That's one of my favorite pieces of scripture.
hmm
How often do I feel as though I'm
Chasing the wind.
the wind?
hmm
Right. And it takes a constant level of discernment and awareness. It is so easy to get caught up in the, demands of our day and moving from task to task. But it's also interesting that I don't know that we really experience God's presence within that distraction, within that chasing of tasks. And so we don't really feel our soul. We don't feel his leadership in our lives. And we do end up sort of chasing the wind and losing that sense of purpose and overrunning ourselves to the point where we don't sleep well, we don't eat well, we don't practice really good self-care.
hmm
And if you're prone to depression, you should know that self-care is an absolute piece of the puzzle. It's the vehicle that your soul is relying on for your body to continue to allow it to thrive in the world.
I love that. You're listening to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us on this August 9th. We're dedicating the show to a topic that I think is probably one of the number one health epidemics that is facing our society, and that is depression. We've kind of part two of our show that we had last week, which was really on suicide. But this shows more on depression, and we just encourage you, if you're listening to our show and you'd like to call in to do so, you can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And as always, we are broadcasting also on our Facebook platform. So if you want to share us a comment, we'd love to just kind of get to it during the show. And if you want to be anonymous, totally let us know. We'll definitely honor that. So just a recap, these are just things that feed into our depression. Not listening to the right voices, number one. Number two is comparing ourselves to others. Number three, not living in balance, not living a life in balance. Here's number four, not having the tools. Life happens, friends. We all go through seasons. And sometimes you just hear people say, well, Father Nick, I just want to be happy. Well, yes, that's great. But God's rescue plan wasn't for us to stay on this earth to be happy. It was to get us to the kingdom of heaven and to experience eternal joy. And so I want to just kind of encourage you remind you, is that Christ tells us when he's on the cross, the night before he goes on the cross, he says, you're going to face struggles, you're going to face tribulations. And I think many of us have kind of bought into this lie that the purpose of this earth is to make us happy. But we will be disappointed if we're depending on earth to make us happy. That's what we have the eternal kingdom for. And so Christ follows a statement up with that yes, you're going to face tribulations, but yes, you'll face it, but be of good courage. Take heart, for I have already overcome this world. I just love that he's already overcome the world, and that's before he even gets on the cross. He's already telling people, he's prophesizing what he is going to be doing for us. And so I was reading, just to kind of give you an example of just how people in an unhealthy way deal with and because they don't have the tools to deal with depression, deal with it in an unhealthy way. So in just 1 month, in March of 2020, when the pandemic happened, in just 1 month, drug addiction went up 18%. Then the following month in April, it went up 29%. And then in May, just a few months after the pandemic started, 42% increase in drug addiction. And so look at that. I mean, just imagine just how because we don't have the right tools and allowing ourselves to kind of buy into a lie that's just not true, how it's impacting all of us. I love 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 4-6. And listen to this. It says, God who comforts us in all of our troubles. In other words, God comforts us because we are going to face troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the suffering of Christ, we experience it, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. For if we are distressed, it is your comfort and your salvation. In other words, I'm not doing it for myself, but in this suffering, I know that you, O Lord, will bring us comfort. You might hear people say sometimes that there is purpose in the pain. There's purpose in our pain.
I think coming along with not having those tools is I see a lot of avoidance, in depression. And I feel a negative, thing bubbling up within me. And there's this sort of like get away from it or immediately like switch it, or deny its kind of presence. And that doesn't actually allow us to heal from it, or deal with it. And so, a lot of times depression can come about as a result of avoiding over a number of years. We aren't problem solving the things that are bringing us down or weighing heavily on our hearts. And so those are questions to really think about. Are there things that I need to be talking about that I'm not talking about? Are there things that continuously worry me that I haven't really figured out how to wrap my head around? Is there something I need to be doing that I'm not doing, that really relates to something I truly value? I think that, when we face worries and when we deal with a lot of negative, that propensity, just like in society, to pretend it's not there, is fostering a lot of reliance on negative coping skills that are not helping us. And so dealing with and problem solving can be so important. And not having that tool of being able to look at and problem solve can really feed it and maintain the things that are holding us back.
And here's number 5. Oftentimes what feeds depression is not wanting to be around people. And I think, Roxanne, isolation. You beautifully shared that earlier. And I think that's just something that we oftentimes, because I think we buy into this lie, again, another lie that the enemy oftentimes gives us, is that we think that, I just want to be by myself. I'll feel better if I'm just by myself. That's not true. The very first problem in the Bible was not sin, it was solitude.
Isn't that interesting?
And God says this in Genesis, the very first chapter, the second chapter of the book of Genesis, the very first book. It says, it's not good for us to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. So remember that sometimes we can buy into that idea that we want to be by ourselves. And yes, there's a time to be alone, but we shouldn't allow ourselves to be physically distant from people. We should allow ourselves to do whatever it is to be close to people, especially people that can inspire us, that can lead us, to guide us, and not buying into this lie that if I'm just by myself, I'll just feel better.
Or that I'm a burden and I'm not good to be around, right?
That's a great point.
Such a struggle with people struggling with depression is I'm a burden. Why would anyone want to be around me?
The book of Romans chapter 12, verses 5. And if you've noticed, I've kind of given you a Bible verse in each of these different points, but listen to what Romans chapter 12, verses 5 says. It says, since we are all one body in Christ, we belong to each other, and each of us needs the other. I love that. We need each other. We want to once again invite you to call in if you're interested in just kind of being part of our conversation, or if you have a question or comment about digging out of depression. Call us at 1-855-237-2346, 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Roxanne, I know we just got an email from one of our listeners, and this is the email question. She says, my 23-year-old daughter has been in depression for the last year. She often says God has favorites. And I think so many people who are struggling with depression can kind of feel like other people have a better life than I do. She has a family that loves her greatly and with great friends. She has a good job, but stressful. She sleeps her life away when she's not working. What guidance can I give her? Roxanne, what would you kind of give? What kind of words can we inspire her with?
I think this is such a common a struggle is not, my life doesn't look the way I want it to look, and everyone else seems to look that way. And, again, when we want something, I tend to encourage people to think about it in terms of there's a value you have in that. What is that value about? Why is it so important? And to really think about what it is. And when we start sort of, looking at what we want, and asking God to sort of show us the way, we begin to find a purpose in our pain, and we begin to sort of lean into something greater, in terms of, we know that depression sort of amplifies a distorted perception of who we are. So, it distorts our identity, it distorts our hope, it distorts our meaning and our purpose. And it's very easy when our life doesn't look the way we want and we're struggling with depression, that we have a very distorted perception of we're not good enough. I'm never going to have that, and, what is the purpose for life? There's no point, right? And so we can sort of easily go down this train, right? So evaluating the why it's important, but then sort of coming back to how am I thinking about it? Is my thinking about this healthy? And is there a purpose in my waiting? I know that we do oftentimes have to wait on things that we want, and the Bible is filled and filled, and let me say it one more time, and filled with people who have had to be patient in the waiting. And really God is looking to grow us in that waiting and to cultivate things within us or within the person he's preparing for us, that can oftentimes, bring us back to a place of, I trust you, Lord, in this waiting, and I'm going to work on the things that I need to work on, thinking healthfully about it, challenging my thoughts around this, and not letting this depression sort of rob me of my perceptions on this journey.
Right. And remember, the thief of joy is comparing ourselves to other people. I think, too, I would encourage the emailer to also have your daughter speak with a parish priest or someone that's a leader in the church. I think it's so important that we have some Christian guidance in this, because as we've talked about, in many ways, we are all under attack. We all face our own spiritual battles. And this is a spiritual warfare. And because of that, I would have a priest maybe spend time with her to kind of evaluate not just this part of her life, but every part of her life, and look at areas that maybe she can improve on her own. Maybe who she's spending time with. Maybe she can look maybe opportunities of at church. Maybe there's opportunities where she can maybe spend more time in prayer, reading the Bible, or being around people that can also inspire her in her walk of faith. I think it's so important that we have that you have that kind of anchor. So I definitely would make it a point to connect with your parish priest. I think that would be just so helpful. So we have a caller, and Stephanie, welcome to Live with the Louhs. We're grateful that you're here with us.
Father Nick, thank you. My sister and brother-in-law is Chris and Maria Mandelaris.
Oh, excellent.
Yes. And so he's an angel. They're both angels, but I really, and I've got my daughter on tonight, but I really suffer with, and I'm trying so hard to depend on the Lord, but I suffer with what's going on in the world right now. And it's just tearing me down. And, I know if the Lord comes and he takes me, that's fine. But I just worry about my children. And I just can't get over it. I can't get past it. Roxanne, I just can't. It's just, I don't know what to say.
I think that your words probably echo in throughout the globe right now, in terms of what we are witnessing in the world. Things are hard to watch right now, but I look at suffering in the world as a reminder of the compassion that we were built to have. I think if you can look into the world and not feel something, you are not human. You don't have the heart that Christ is yearning for us all to have. I mean, these are the reminders that we're called to serve. We're called to see the compassion. We're called to bring light into this world of darkness, because there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of heartache, and there's a lot of pain. And I feel it brings us closer to Christ when we're able to sort of bring that into the darkness. I don't think we're supposed to walk away from it. And I don't think that when we sit in sort of, and I'm prone to this, right? I can sort of sit and marinate in all the things that are wrong, and then, decide I'm going to take on 4 new professions and go and heal everything and fix it all. And at the end of the day, I come back to what's one small step I can take in a direction that gives my compassion wheels. And that always seems to help. The one small thing, it just seems to help and to fit. So I'm not so overwhelmed by the suffering that I see.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing, Roxanne. I think it's I think every person goes through that and experiences it. But let me kind of give just some additional, hopefully some insight.
Okay.
The average person spends about 2 hours a day worrying. That's what the general statistics show. 2 hours a day of worrying. Almost 80%, almost 80% of what we worry about never happens. These are, again, are statistics that are very well known and very well. These are scientific statistics that are shared, not necessarily religious ones, just simply that. And so, if you just simply took the 2 hours a day that we tend to worry as a society, if we spent the 2 hours a day and you multiplied over the 365 days a year, you would spend close to 1 full month, 30 full days, 24 hours a day for 30 days in a state of worry. Most physicians will tell you that the number one reason of why people come to see them is stress-related illnesses, because the impact, Stephanie, of what you may be worried about, fearful about, not only impacts in that moment, what you may be experiencing or feeling depressed about may not have anything to do with even what's going on right now. It may have been something that has been building from weeks or months ago. I read a study that found that the impact of a state of worry can impact the body sometimes 6 months after that event. So what do we do about that? I think the biggest thing is that we remember some very practical things. In the Bible, 365 times in Scripture, God uses these words, fear not. Why did he do that? And why does it happen to just correspond with the number of days of the year? It's because he knew that one of the greatest weaknesses that we would experience would be fear. Because fear takes the attention off of God and puts it onto this world. It takes the investment off of Christ and puts the investment into this world. So when we see people that are constantly struggling with fear, especially if it leads to levels of depression, what's happening is that we're buying into a lie that earth is our homeland. The Bible says that earth is not our homeland. In fact, St. Paul says that we are aliens on this earth. Our homeland, we are citizens for the kingdom of heaven. Our passport says that our home is not where we currently were born in. It's where it is the kingdom of heaven. So if 365 times it says to fear not, I would challenge you with this. And it's something I've shared in sermons before, is that I would say, starve your fears and feed your faith. When I say we're in a season of fasting right now, so I would say turn off the news. Because
I don't turn the news on, but I do read too many emails.
Yeah. Well, anything that provides you that, and we're just talking about this brief period of time. I would say that limit the amount of negative information you're feeding, because again, whatever you feed thrives, and whatever you starve dies. So you want to feed your faith. So when that knee-jerk reaction is to do what you typically do, is to watch the news or read an email or whatever it may be, I'm going to fast from that. I'm going to fast. I'm going to starve that. And I'm going to start feeding my faith. I'm going to remember, fear not 365 times. I'm going to remember that, take heart, I've already overcome this world. I'm going to remember I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So those are just some things that I would encourage you to do. Obviously, we could spend a whole show talking about this, but these are things that you, these are things though that I would just these are things, Stephen, that I would just encourage you, and I encourage our listeners, is that you are in control of your walk of faith. So so if we keep letting other people, whether it be media, emails, thoughts, or whatever it is, control, listen, in the absence of your leadership, chaos will happen. So just be very careful about that. These are some small tools, but definitely you can, call us at the church, and we would be more happy to spend more time with you. But I hope that is some helpful information for you, and I hope that you have a great night. Thanks so much for calling in.
Oh, Father Nick, thank you so much. Thank you.
God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.
I think that, what a great call in, because I think our brokenness in so many ways comes from the result of us living with a heart in this broken world, and in a world where, circumstances remind us that the world is anything but perfect, and the fallen nature of it can take over our lives and sometimes leave us in that state of despair. And if we aren't necessarily aware of how we're thinking about our situations, our lives, the things that bother us, the things that we see in the world, and we aren't taking sort of that active, choice to sort of lead it and allow God to lead us, it can leave us so brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm.
And just what a great echo just to what I think so many people struggle with what they
Absolutely.
see in the world, us
Absolutely.
included.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I don't typically we encourage the faithful not to really talk about what we're fasting from. But I'll be honest with you, just for me, what's been so helpful for me, Roxanne, is, and we've talked about this. We talk about our fasting together as a couple before we begin a fast, and obviously not just the food products, but just spiritually speaking. And for us, and for me, I've totally turned off the radio for the last, since August 1st. And it's just simply my time and just stillness. So every time I'm in that car, nothing is on. It's just total quietness. And I will tell you, Roxanne, we've talked about this in the past, how liberating, how clear my thoughts are. Even, just the clarity by which I can make decisions, and I'm realizing, how important it is for me to be inserting that in the day, because if I don't make time, I will use it. I will use it on other things that I'm typically used to doing.
Yeah, it's those reminders to lead in to our faith. I mean, when you're living in this fallen world, I think that is always a reminder that we need God in our lives to lead us, and we have to accept all these things. And sometimes we stop trying to kind of control it all. You embrace this sort of like falling on your knees and an acceptance of everything that's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and you fully come to depend more on God to kind of take the wheel. And I think it's a process. I think that's a journey. I don't think that's a step you take. But I've found that in all the suffering, that first stage is always sort of trying to control it all, and anxiety about control, and a fear about what if it happens to me or my family, and when we sort of like sit down, I feel like that's when we see God stand up, even though he was standing there the whole time.
I love that, Roxanne. That's awesome. So here, we just have a few more moments. We want to shift now to kind of give you just some very practical ways that you can do steps that you can take today to kind of dig yourself out of darkness. And obviously this is as we mentioned earlier, just reminding all of you to please stay connected to your spiritual father. Please, if you have a therapist, make sure that you're running these through with them, but stay connected to the church, be very much engaged. Let your priest know where you are and what you're kind of going through. So the things that we're going to give you are in addition to those things. Okay. But here's number one: take better care of yourself. Self-care is not selfish. It's truly important for us to take better care of ourselves. I heard someone put it like this: burning the candle from both ends isn't that bright. And I can tell you that I think for me, that's something that I have to always remind myself. It's that quote actually I have in my office. So it's just one of the things I would encourage you. So remember this word busy. We oftentimes, many people just say, I'm just so busy, Father, or Dr. Roxanne, I'm just so busy. Remember the letters that make up the word busy, B-U-S-Y. And remember this, that when we allow ourselves to be busy, busy to an excessive nature, we are B, bound, U, under, S, Satan's, Y, yoke. When we're busy, we're bound under Satan's yoke. And remember what I shared with you at the top of the show in the book of Ecclesiastes: it's better to have one handful and have peace of mind than two handfuls and we're chasing the wind. So I love how King David says in the book of Psalms, a beautiful prayer. And this may be your prayer tonight: Lord, teach me to number my days because they're limited. Teach me to number those days.
With self-care, just remember that line: get up and get out. Because depression will tell you to stay in, isolate, don't take that call, ignore the invitation. It's going to tell you don't go for that walk. I would say don't think about whether you feel like it. Put on your shoes and go, because movement is a powerful inhibitor of depression and a powerful mediator of depression. So get up, go for that walk, take that shower. If that's the only thing you do in your day, check your mail on your way back in your house. You'll be better because of it.
So again, number one, take better care of yourself. Number two, turn closer to Christ. And you may be saying, well, Father Nick, I'm already in church. I'm close to Christ. Listen to me, everyone. Get closer. Get closer. So I oftentimes tell people that, sometimes we kind of live off of what we used to learn maybe in Sunday school, or we allow ourselves to kind of get stagnant in our walk of faith. But what we have to recognize is that Christianity is not meant to be in neutral. Either you're growing or you're dying in your faith. I love how St. Paisios of Mount Athos, he put it this way: the problem that we see in this world is that we have lost God at the center of our lives. And isn't that so true? For so many of us, we're putting other things at the center of our lives. So let me kind of put my own little kind of just comment on this, and that is, let's stop living in our head and start living our faith. Let's stop living in our heads and start living in our faith. So what does that look like? Roxanne talked about this earlier, but be still, friends. Be still with God. Allow yourselves to spend more time in prayer, not where you're always telling God what you need, but sometimes just simply listening to God guide you. Take time to read your Bible, and take time to just spend in the house of the Lord, in church. I'm just going to make it a point that I'm going to turn my life away from what I'm thinking to who I need to be believing. Here's number 3. I think it's so important, and we can spend a long time talking about this, but is make sure that you are taking inventory of the right friends. If there's one area in our life that I think that so many of us underestimate, and not just young people in general, but all of us, we can underestimate the power of having the right friends and how they can help us dig ourselves out of depression. You see, your friends can either keep you in depression or help carry you out. And so what I want to encourage you is that you look for people that are making you a better person. Not just a better person, I would argue, but a better Christian. Someone said it like this: look closely at your closest associates in your life, and that is the direction that you're heading. So look closely at the people that you have in your life. Are they going through depression as well? Are they always a Debbie Downer? Are they negative people? As the old adage goes, misery loves company. Then take inventory, because they may not be the people that you're going to need to help dig you out of it.
When you think about surrounding yourself with the right people, I think if you're struggling with depression too, to remember that it is okay to get help making even what you consider small decisions. It's okay to ask for help doing even the things that you consider something you should already be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think with depression, there's so much judgment about what we are not, about being a burden, about what we're incapable of, what we should be able to do on our own, that we don't ask for help. We struggle to make small decisions. We struggle to solve a problem that maybe somebody else's ears can hear and help with more quickly. And so, one of the most powerful things about reaching out is remembering you're not alone, but to get help with the things that you're struggling with, no matter how small they feel to you.
Mm-hmm.
They are big if you are unable to do them in that headspace. So rather than sort of sitting in that judgment and thinking about who you'd be through someone else's eyes, just go ahead and invite that support. It's amazing what God can do through the people He's placed around you and who has put in your life to help you.
Roxanne, as we're towards the last few minutes of the show, I thought it would just be great to kind of share with our listeners, if you were to give them just a word of encouragement about, and you mentioned this just briefly earlier in the show, is finding their purpose, and how important it is to shift from the stagnant level of just kind of staying where we're at to shifting to be productive. You mentioned get up and get out, but maybe just can give us some examples of just some ways that we could truly do that for our listeners.
Well, I mean, I think, again, don't ask God, why me? Why do I feel this way? Ask Him to show you the way. Inviting that Jesus prayer, for, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. You invite such a connection to Him to work through you and to remind you of your purpose, which does remain, whether in darkness or in light. He is trying to use you always. His love remains for you, whether in darkness and in light. And we know that all things that we are enduring are working together for some greater good that we may or may not be able to see at this point. And so we can remember in our depression that we are loved. We are of value and we are forgiven. There is no guilt that should be holding us back, no shame that should be holding us back, that He hasn't already conquered and forgiven within us when we turn back to Him. And I think we have to remember who God is telling us we are rather than engaging in what the depression says that we are. And our faith is there to remind us of our goodness, which then renews us, strengthens us, and reminds us of our purpose. And so if you're struggling with your purpose, if you're struggling with depression, one of the last tools I'll give everyone is the power of putting words on it and announcing it, what you're feeling and what you're saying and how you're perceiving life. Because when you're feeling it, when you're experiencing depression, you're living in a very different part of your brain that does not invite healing. Okay. When you have to put words on it through writing it down or expressing it to a clergyman or a trusted friend or a counselor, you move into a different part of your brain that invites healing, the ability to reason and discern and analyze whether this thought is a helpful thought or a depressing thought that's going to make things worse. So there is power in exposing what you have been holding in if you are depressed. The things that you have been living and feeling and experiencing, there is power in just having to put words on it aloud, on paper, and with someone who loves you that can help renew your purpose. So speak to a trusted friend, speak to your priest, speak to a counselor.
I know that you're not alone. We thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. We really, really appreciate it. We thank Matushka Trudy, as always, for producing our great show. She's an amazing friend of ours and just an amazing person at Ancient Faith. Thanks to all of you as well for joining us tonight. And if you've enjoyed our show, we encourage you to join us on our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs. And if you're looking for just a daily word of encouragement, as we mentioned at the top of the show, go right now to our website at thelouhs.com. That's LOUHS.com. Click on that subscribe button and just put your email address. And tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you'll receive a daily word of encouragement. God bless you, my friends, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with The Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Are you curious about the Orthodox Christian faith?
Do you have questions about Orthodox Christianity that you can't trust strangers in internet forums to answer?
Are you an Orthodox Christian looking for a reliable first place